Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and you already know how excited I am. And I'm actually exceptionally excited today. I mean, not only did I just come off of an amazing call with one of my all of my clients are just absolutely wonderful. I mean, all people are absolutely wonderful in their hearts, and we talk about that here. But I just got off an amazing client call, and it was just so inspiring. And this is after having a great meeting last night of a group guided meditation and discussion, and I'm just riding high here, and I'm just so excited to be here. And now I get to do this with you. It's moments like this where I love what I do. And so I'm here to talk today about the science of mindfulness. And if you're watching the YouTube channel, you can see that I've worn my favorite science-y t-shirt. It's a picture of a brain on my t-shirt here. And so I'm doing that in honor of you all as I explain some of the science of mindfulness. As you know, a lot of what I talk about here is based in scientific research, right? We talk about this all the time. And in fact, I want to start off by reminding you about something that His Holiness the Dalai Lama said one time. I use that phrase in honor and respect. Even though I'm not a practicing Buddhist, I just want to be respectful. But back it was around 1992 or 3, I believe, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama approached a number of scientists here in the West, right? Now this is actually somebody I talk about a lot here, right? His name is Richard Davidson, technically, but I guess he lets his friends and fans call him Richie. But he introduces himself a lot as Richie, so I feel like I know him, I love him, so I use that. But anyways, he's one of the people I'm going to talk about with one of these research projects that's done with mindfulness. But what's really important here is that Richie Davidson, in the early 90s, he was a prominent neuroscientist, right? He was, I think he's at the University of Wisconsin, but very, very prominent in the field. But he also happens to be a Buddhist meditation practitioner, right? Like he has, during his college days, I've read a couple of his books where he talks about, taking a semester off and living in an ashram in India, which is basically a monastery, right? And so he has done deep work in meditation, and back before it was popular, right? This is, his college days are going back probably to the late 70s, right? And so he, had this sort of presence in that community. So it's only natural, I suppose, that somehow the Dalai Lama found Richie Davidson and they connected. I think there were a couple of other scientists involved at this point, but basically, and Richie tells a story in one of his TED Talks of the Dalai Lama grabbing his arm and saying, you have to help me. You have to help me show the rest of the world how scientifically founded this stuff is, and so from that time, Richie Davidson and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, they started working together and collaborating on some scientific research projects, which has really opened the door to this work being done in the West. It's pretty amazing, And it's really a curious kind of way that this all came about. The Dalai Lama apparently, from what I've read, he approached Richie and he said that, you have all these great machines and all these great techniques and this scientific method that you've perfected here, and you use it to study pathology. Right? In psychology in the West, it's all about what's wrong with people. That's the only thing you use all this information, this knowledge, and this equipment for. Why not use all of these resources to study the well mind, to study the minds of people who are extraordinarily happy, extraordinarily calm, extraordinarily well, right? And so who's more that than a group of Buddhist monks who live in monasteries and just do meditation all the time, right? They don't have a lot of stressors in their lives. They don't have, a lot of pressures that we have in the West. And so they don't have the same pathologies that we do. In fact, they don't really have pathology at all, not psychological pathology. And so it made for a perfect union, right? And so at that time, the Dalai Lama recruited and invited a number of monks. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. A number of monks to come over here and subject themselves to the studies. right? Subject themselves to real-time functional MRI where they could watch what was happening in the brain. There's lots of other different studies that have been done with these people. It's amazing. The wealth of information that came out of these studies is truly amazing. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Okay, now since the early 90s, when all these monks were coming over here and doing this work, of course it attracted a lot of attention in the scientific community, and so a lot of work has subsequently been done, studying meditators, studying what happens in the brain as you're meditating, what happens in the brain as you've done a lot of meditation. And so I picked out like 6 different, and the reason my mind wandered is because as I was thinking about the Dalai Lama coming here, I was thinking about another one of the monks named Matthew Richard, who after the scientists studied his brain, they labeled him the happiest man on earth. Right? Because he had, in brain scans, he literally had all of the markers of, like the activity in his brain was all in the areas that are associated with well-being and positive emotions. And so they dubbed him the happiest man on earth. And it's funny, he was interviewed at one point talking about that, and somebody asked him, well, what does that mean to be the happiest man on earth? Does that mean that you never get unhappy? Does that mean you never get sad? You never feel anger? You never feel any of these negative emotions? How does it work? And he said, no, that's not what it is at all. He said, in fact, I look at, if I turn on the news and I see suffering happening around the world, or I see, devastating climate, issues that are happening as a result of human behavior. I see, governments doing horrible things. I see, armies doing horrible things, all this destruction, all this injustice in the world. He says, I feel that very deeply. And it brings a great amount of sadness. But beneath that sadness, Matthew Richard says, there is an ocean of happiness that I can always return to, right? And so what he's describing there is very important, and something that we talk about here in this podcast is that it's not about avoiding the sadness and avoiding the things, and this is a problem in the spiritual community, right? This notion of bypass, right? Where I don't watch the news because it brings me down, it brings me to a negative energy, a lower vibration, or something like that. Well, that's just escapism, right? And that's no different from doing drugs to escape the problems of the world, right? There's no difference there. Right. So what Matthew Richard is saying is the exact opposite of that. And that's what we talk about here in this podcast, is that it's about turning towards the suffering and turning towards the discomfort and turning towards the atrocities that you can see happening in this world, but allowing yourself to still be happy, which again, the happiness comes not from knowing that everything is okay in the world, right? The happiness comes from deep, deep, deep within us that can be tapped into and cultivated through the practices which allow us to be present, to be accepting of what we find in the present moment, to live with compassion, and to be non-judging about our experience, right? That's where happiness comes from. And it's very, very simple. And that's also a part of well-being, right? But we also talk about the 4 constituents of well-being that come from Richard Davidson again. Attention, right, which is part of meditation. Resilience, which is also part of mindfulness, right? Coming back into the moment. Outlook, the ability to see a positive outlook in people and experiences and circumstances. And then finally, altruism and generosity. Right? So you can see how these things all meld together and mingle, right? And that's why somebody who spends all their life meditating and practicing mindfulness and compassion is the happiest man on earth. Right? Which I'm trying to be number 2, by the way. And I'm getting there. I really am. And so let's get into this. We have a lot to cover here, and I don't want to go too long because I know sometimes these videos do get a little bit long. So if you'll bear with me, I'm looking at my my whiteboard in front of my desk, but I have one of my lights that's kind of blocking it. I didn't realize. So, okay, that's better. I just moved it with my foot. Okay, so number one, coming in at number one, we're going to do the opposite of the top 10. We're going to go from 1 to 6. And so the first one I'd like to talk about is a study that was done with Jon Kabat-Zinn's work. Now, Jon Kabat-Zinn is, an amazing guy, and he's still to this day, he's in his mid 70s, I think, and he does a free mindfulness training thing on YouTube. Like he's so dedicated to this work, such an inspiration to me. So back in the late 70s, Jon Kabat-Zinn is a doctor, and he is the first person to introduce mindfulness into the medical setting. Okay, and so what he did was he approached the University of Massachusetts. Okay. And he talked to I don't remember the exact story. It's been a long time since I read it. But basically, he contacted this hospital and he said, you know what? All the people who you feel are beyond repair because of the stress in their life, right? The people who have, chronic hypertension or heart disease or other maladies that have clearly come from chronic stress, right? And at that time, the scientists, the medical community didn't know what to do with these people. They didn't have any way to help these people, right? So Jon Kabat-Zinn comes along and says, send them to me. I'm going to set up a department in the hospital, and I want you to send all of these patients who are suffering health consequences of chronic stress, and let me work with them and teach them an 8-week course of what he calls mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is essentially very close to the work that I do. It's definitely inspired by him. So Jon Kabat-Zinn, since 1979, has been doing that in the University of Massachusetts, right? And he's helped tens of thousands of people this way, right? But these are people who are chronically sick, they're in the hospital, right? This is big deal stuff. But he has helped them to halt the damage and kind of get some quality of life despite the damage that's been done through the stress, through the chronic stress, right? And so his 8-week program is well known and used a lot, right? At this point, he's not just in the University of Massachusetts. I think there's an MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic in just about every state of the United States and in Europe as well, right? So, so it's everywhere, right? It's that's how successful it was in the beginning, right? And so he's had, so he has these sort of lectures that are available for tape, he sells them, you can buy, no longer tape, but they're on digital downloads now, of course. But he's been selling them since the 80s as a tape. Here's the book, here's the tapes. Go do it. 8 weeks, you're going to feel a lot better, that kind of thing. And so there's a really great, the first experiment I wanted to tell you about, the first study, was in a clinic where they were treating people for psoriasis. Now, psoriasis is a skin condition, right? It's basically like a rash, right, that gets worse and worse and more pronounced. It's very uncomfortable for people. It's very itchy and very, dry feeling. It's very uncomfortable. It's a very, it impedes one's life. It's a big deal for people who have it. And so there's many treatments that they've done, right? Medications and whatever other modes of treating this thing. But there's really one clinic decided to, while they were giving people the treatment, right, they took half of the group of people they were treating for psoriasis, and they separated them, and one half of the group got to, while they were undergoing the treatments, they just listened to Jon Kabat-Zinn's tapes, right? They didn't go through the course. They didn't do any formal meditation except for what Jon Kabat-Zinn was telling them, which is probably a body scan and, talking about, being present while you're eating and stuff, basically the same stuff I talk about here, right? So it would be like if they played my podcast while they were undergoing the treatment, right? And the people who were listening to the mindfulness-based stress reduction tapes, their psoriasis cleared up 3 times faster than the people who weren't, right? So it, so this mindfulness, really does impact the entire body in a really, really powerful way. Okay, so that's the first study that I want to tell you about. Now, the second one is so cool. It is so cool. So there's a phenomenon called attentional blink. Okay, attentional blink. Now, what attentional blink means, right? Like, let's say I was to show you in very quick succession, right? Like with, 1/10 of half a second, right? In that kind of frequency, and in that frequency, right? Every 1/10 of 1/2 of a tenth of a second, some numbers were flashing on a screen in front of you, right? And in those numbers, right, I put two letters. Right. So let's say it's number, letter, number, letter, number. Right. And that's how, if you're watching something like that. Right. And I tell you, okay, pick out the letters. Right. Every time you see the letter, tell me you saw the letter. Right. Now, even going that fast, your brain can register that you saw a letter. Right. And you're going to hit the button, a second later or something, but you will see it and you will register it. Right. If you're looking for it, right? I mean, you would always register it subconsciously, but these people were told to, okay, watch the screen and tell me when you see the letters, right? So the attentional blink phenomenon is when people do this exercise, right? If you were to go through this, right? Well, not you because you practice mindfulness, but if somebody who doesn't practice mindfulness goes through that exercise, right? Number, letter, number, right? What happens is if the two letters are within about a half a second of one another, the person's not going to see the second one, right? And that's this phenomenon of the attentional blink. It's almost like your attention takes a little rest, right? Because it's like looking, it sees that first letter. Okay, I saw it. And so if that second letter comes within that half a second that your brain kind of, relaxes for a half a second, then you're not going to see that second letter, right? Well, when they tested people in this exact fashion after about 8 weeks of mindfulness training, and they found that half a second was, people were seeing even like, again, like 1/10 of or a half of 1/10 of a second or something like that. They basically eliminated that attentional blink, and that people could see those letters even right after each other and still see the letters. So that's how much this impacts our ability to pay attention, which you remember is one of the 4 constituents of well-being, right? So it has nothing to do with seeing numbers and letters, but it has everything to do with your psychological and physical well-being. Right. So now we've covered something in the body with psoriasis and something in the attention, which again, attention is so important in our lives, right? Whether we're, with our children or with our loved ones having a conversation, the ability to really be present is in the ability to pay attention. Right? Like that's what it is. And so the more we can cultivate the ability to pay attention, not only is it better for our well-being, but it impacts all the different relationships we have, right? It impacts our work. It impacts the ability to drive well. It impacts everything. Everything. All right. So that's number 2. Let's see. What's number 3 here? Oh, this one is also, I'm going to say they're all cool. I mean, they really are. Okay. So this one, there's a scientist by the name of Antoine Lutz, and Antoine Lutz has done a lot of really cool work in this field, and I'll share other stories about him some other time. But this one specific study that he did, right? And he's a brain scientist and really, very curious about brain waves and the functioning of the brain, right? And so he took some of these monks and he studied what he found, or let me rephrase that. He examined the monks, under, not while they were meditating. I think he did while they were meditating and also while they weren't meditating. And that's a big deal right here, because what he found was that when monks were meditating, they produced what's known as high amplitude gamma brain waves. Okay, it's not important to understand all of what that means, but gamma waves, very succinctly, are when every region of your brain is working, right? That's when gamma waves are happening. So brain waves are just this oscillation of these chemical kind of neurotransmitters, they call them, right? Which is just basically how your brain regions communicate with one another, right? And so gamma waves are the ones that are known for creativity and like when you're feeling in the flow, when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I am on my game today, that's when you're feeling gamma waves, right? It's associated with higher levels of function function, higher levels of cognitive function, higher levels of reasoning, higher levels of accomplishment. It's all good stuff, right? And so what he found was not only did the monks show that they had higher amplitude brain waves, gamma waves, happening while they were meditating, but even when they were not meditating. Right? I mean, it was a difference, right? Like the gamma waves would be stronger when they were meditating, but even when they were at rest and not doing anything, they were still showing signs. So it's very much evidence that that just like, if you go to the gym, right, and you lift weights every day at the gym, your muscles get bigger, not just while you're lifting the weights, right, but while you're sitting at home, your muscles are still big. Right? So this is showing on a physiological, neurological level, the same thing happening in your brain with regards to meditation, right? Of course, it's not making a muscle bigger, but it's making the functioning of your brain more powerful and more strong. But that's not all, folks. The next one actually shows that there was a thickening of the cortex. So literally makes your brain bigger. Okay, this study was done by a woman named Sarah Lazar, right? And she found that she studied a bunch of people who were meditators, and they were all shown to have and she studied compared them to people who weren't meditators, right? And she showed that the group of meditators all had a thicker level of cortex, right? So the part of your brain that's responsible for thinking, right? The executive functioning of your brain, people who were meditators had bigger ones of those, right? Their cortex was bigger and thicker, right? Therefore more powerful, more robust, right? And so some people poo-pooed her because there's a term in the scientific community that says correlation does not equal causation, right? So it's very possible that she just happened to get a bunch of people who had thicker brain cortexes naturally. So she went further. And what she did was she studied people who were novice meditators, meaning, been meditating for a year or so, maybe even less, and then people who were expert meditators, like Buddhist monks. And what she found was that even within the group of meditators, right, who all had thicker cortexes than the non-meditators, but those people who had meditated more in their life had even thicker cortex, brain matter, gray matter, right? And so it's real, it's very real, and it's very exciting, right? So literally, when you're sitting there meditating, you are making yourself smarter. And that, of course, doesn't even include the emotional intelligence that's coming out of it, which a lot of people argue that that's much more important in our lives than IQ, right? Or smart, right? But you're literally making yourself smarter in both of these areas by working on mindfulness. So congratulations, all right? It's exciting. You should be excited about this. Okay, coming in at number 5 is my old friend, Dr. Dan Siegel. Dr. Dan Siegel is a wonderful person. I want you, if I could ask a favor of all of you, I want you to go on YouTube later, and I want you to look up Richie Davidson and just watch one of his talks, and then watch one of Dan Siegel's talks, okay? I have a feeling you're going to fall in love just like I have. They are amazing people. They are brilliant. They are, just absolute genius, but they're doing work that matters so much. Right. And so, 7 years ago or something like that, I attended a seminar with Dr. Siegel, and I was very much in the beginning of my journey here. I was like trying to figure out how can I teach this to people, like, because I had already known that my own benefits that came from this. I already felt that. I already knew. I was convinced. Like, you didn't have to convince me that this works. I can feel it. I can see it in my life. But now, how do I convince others? Right. And so that's where I started studying the science, and like I'm talking about here, because this is the stuff that, even for the Dalai Lama, right, it proves it, right? And so, which, by the way, I forgot to mention before that the Dalai Lama, and this is worth mentioning, I'm sorry to digress, but at the time when he was bringing these monks over to be studied, he went on record saying that if the scientific outcomes show that some of our ancient texts are not right, we're going to have to revise. We're going to have to rewrite what the Buddha wrote if it comes down to it. I really wanted to call that out because I always give him a lot of credit for that. All right. So anyway, back to Dan Siegel. So in this first seminar that I ever attended from Dan Siegel, or anything really mindfulness, right? He talked about something that just absolutely blew my mind. Okay. Telomeres. You might never have heard of them, but they're very, very important to you. Okay, telomeres. So inside every one of your cells, your body is made up of about 55 trillion cells. That's how many cells. Like, it's a lot, right? Inside each one of those cells is a nucleus. Inside that nucleus are the chromosomes that make you who you are, right? The chromosomes are why you're standing upright and using tools rather than, picking bugs off your partner in a tree somewhere, right? Like, that's the difference, right? Like, that's what makes us who we are, is our chromosomes, right? Our genes, right? And so at the ends of every chromosome, right, you have this little cap, and this little cap is called a telomere. Okay, now you can look at this cap very similarly, and I've heard this from many scientists, so I'm not just making this up, but it's just like, you can picture it just like the little plastic cap at the end of a shoelace, right? When that thing falls off, and I don't say if, I say when, right? Because we've all been there. But when that cap falls off your shoelace, right, what happens? The shoelace just unwinds, it unravels, right? And it just becomes frayed and it's basically unusable, right? Well, the same thing happens to your chromosomes, right? And now here's the thing, the telomere throughout your life, it slowly reduces in size, right? Until at the end of your life, when you're a very old person, hopefully, you start losing them naturally, right? And so then your chromosomes start to unwind, and then your cells die, and that signals the end of the life of the organism, right? And so that's when you die, right? And so the telomeres, right, are very much a sign of how, our longevity, right, or the health of our cells, right? And so what was found by Dan Siegel and some of his colleagues, right, was that as they measured people's telomeres, right, they found that people who did mindfulness meditation, just like what we talk about here, they not only slowed down the shortening of these telomeres, but they actually reversed the process. Now, this has been studied by many more people since I heard about that. There's lots and lots of studies, right? And one of the things that was also found is that people who are under high levels of chronic stress, those telomeres shorten at a much faster rate than people who are not, like a 6-to-1 rate, right? So in 1 year, your cells age by 6 years, right? And so what Dr. Siegel and colleagues and many other people since then have found is that by doing mindfulness practices, you can actually reverse that process, which is actually extending the life of your body in a very, very real way. So you can live longer and you can live happier. So far, so good, right? I mean, who doesn't want more of that, right? And all you got to do is a little practice, like we talk about here. Okay, so now, I know we're getting long here, but now's the crown jewel, okay? Because this is the one I really wanted to talk about. Like, I could have skipped all of these and just talked about this one, right? So I've told you how much I love Jon Kabat-Zinn. I've told you how much I love Richie Davidson. Well, guess what? Back in the mid-'90s, they collaborated on a study. It's so fun. So Jon Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson went to a biotech firm, okay, in a corporate setting in the Midwest. I think it was 1993, if I remember correctly. So this biotech firm was known, like infamous, like they couldn't keep employees there because of how hard the work was, right? It was just 24/7, just everybody feeling super high levels of stress, super, exhaustion, burnout, the whole thing, right? So Richie and Jon came in, and they put everybody through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program, right? 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Basically the same kind of thing that I put my clients through. I do 12-week. I could do it in 8 weeks, just like Jon Kabat-Zinn does. But they did this, right? And what they found, there's 3 things that are enormous that they found here. But then there's a 4th thing that I want to talk about in closing here. The 3 things they found was that as they scan the brains of now, of course, Richie Davidson is a true scientist, right? So he designed an elegant experiment, right, where he separated the groups, right? One group was like told to work out every day or something like that to relieve their stress. And because the problem is if you only give mindfulness to one group and don't do anything with the other group, then there's the placebo effect, right? So they always will have the control group do something, right? So that they believe that they're doing something to increase their well-being on some level, right? So one group was told to work out every day, do some exercise, eat this, do that, that kind of thing. And the other half of the group was given the 8-week mindfulness program. The group that took the 8-week mindfulness program in brain scans showed higher activity in the areas of the brain associated with positive emotions. Right? Now, remember, one of the keys to well-being is outlook, right? The ability to see a positive outlook, which is your positive emotions, right? And so they found that in brain scans that these people who had done 8 weeks of mindfulness training showed activity, higher levels of activity than the control group in those areas that signified well-being, okay? And happiness and positive emotions, right? But wait, there's more. They also found, of course, that the stress and anxiety was much lower, right? They found that people were feeling better, and their heart rates were better, their blood sugar, all the markers for stress were much lower, again, than the control group, right? But wait, there's more. This one's a big one, especially in this time that we're living, with the vaccine going around and everything like that. Listen to this, okay? The two men brilliantly timed this experiment, this study, around flu season, right? So that the end of the 8-week program was at the beginning of flu season in the Midwest. Okay, why is that important? I'll tell you. It's important because they gave each person in both groups, they gave everybody a flu shot, right? And a few days later, they came back and they took blood from everyone, and they found that the people who had been doing the mindfulness training for 8 weeks produced more antibodies to the flu virus than the people who had not. Okay, so that shows your immune system. That shows your cellular health. That shows your happiness. That shows your ability to function in your brain, the ability to get into the flow. What else? Your attention. I mean, basically, it's proving everything that we need to know. And that's why you listen to this podcast, right? But I'd like to say one more note about that last study, okay? Because this is kind of a big deal. So that was the first time that mindfulness was brought into a corporate setting. Okay, but it certainly wasn't the last, right? And you'll hear a lot about mindfulness in corporate settings now, right? Like people hire people like me, corporations hire people like me to come in and work with their employees to teach them mindfulness practices. The same way I teach my clients, the same way I teach you, basically. And of course, it's easy to say, well, yeah, I mean, that's great. All of these wonderful benefits. Yeah, awesome. Why not? Right? And yeah, I'm with you. However, let's examine the possible motivation on the part of the corporations, right? Do you think they're really doing it out of the benefit, out of the goodness of their heart to just be kind to people? I mean, I wish that was true. I would like to believe that's true, but I know enough about corporations to know that they're much more self-serving than that. Right. And so that's what's kind of created a bit of a rift in this work, in the world of this work, I should say. A few years ago, somebody, I believe a Hindu practitioner in India, wrote a book called Mindfulness. Right, where he criticized very strongly the idea of what Jon Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson did. Now, I think Richie Davidson and Jon Kabat-Zinn did it for pure reasons. I think they really do want to help people because I know enough about them, right? But I'm talking about the corporations themselves, right? And then, of course, now there's lots of other teachers. Like once everybody realizes, like, wow, you mean the corporation will pay me $10,000 to teach their staff how to? I'll do that. I can do that, right? And at one point, I'll admit that I thought that way. Right. And that's actually in the very beginning of my my teaching journey. That's kind of where I had my eyes set. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I'll just go to these corporations, spend, 8 weeks and make a lot of money. Right. So it's a very self-serving thing, right? And so the people who started criticizing this mindfulness, right? This mindfulness light, right? They criticized it because, number one, the intention is not pure. Right? The intention on the part of the corporations and on the part of these teachers is not really to, if as soon as there's a money aspect to it, as soon as there's a profit motive to it, it changes a little bit, right? But specifically, and I don't think there's a problem with earning money to do what you do, and I certainly, I'm changing people's lives, and people are thanking me, and and people all tell me that my rates are very reasonable, they're lower than they expected, and all that. So there's a way to do it in a wholesome and heartfelt way, right? But really, the one thing that's missing, and this is part of my mission here, is that, and this was called out in the Mindfulness book, is that, the teachings of the Buddha, right, and all the different people who have come from his line, and even before the Buddha, the people who were practicing Hinduism, which is what became Buddhism, right? Which, they call Buddhism Hinduism packaged for export, right? And so even from the roots of Buddhism, right, the component that's really important in this work, in a traditional sense, is the compassion part, right? Is the wanting for the world to be more happy and for the world to be, kinder and more loving towards one another, right? And so that's the criticism of mindfulness or corporate mindfulness. Pardon me. And so there's another story that I'd like to tell you real quick about an author who I've read some of his books. Nothing to do with mindfulness or anything. He's just a great author, nonfiction books. His name is John Perkins, and he writes about like American imperialism and stuff like that. Pretty heavy stuff, and not pertinent to this podcast here, but anyway, I was reading one of his books, rereading recently from years ago, and I didn't catch this the first time around, but he actually had a chance to meet the Dalai Lama on His Holiness's plane, right? He was about to fly off to somewhere, and they happened to be in the same city, and so they had communicated via letters and stuff like that. And John Perkins had always aspired to be a Buddhist, right? He that's what he wanted to do, and back in the 80s, it was very, that's what we thought, like, you had to be a Buddhist if you were going to meditate, kind of thing. And so he met the Dalai Lama, and he went to kiss his feet, which apparently is part of the tradition, right? The Dalai Lama stopped him. He says, no, you don't have to do that. And he says, well, I'm trying to live like a Buddha. I want to be a Buddhist, and that's what we do, right? And so the Dalai Lama said to him, he says, don't become a Buddhist. Don't practice Buddhism. There's enough Buddhists in the world today. But do practice compassion, because the world needs more compassion. And that, again, I didn't recognize that when I read the book like 15, 20 years ago for the first time, right? But now when I reread it, that quote, that touched my heart, right? Because it really affirmed what I've been believing this whole time, is that there's a place that exists between, mindfulness and Buddhism, right? The just purely profit-driven, corporate kind of view of this work, and the work of the deeply philosophical and spiritual end of Buddhism, right? There is a place in between, and that's what I call heartfulness. Right? It's mindfulness with an emphasis on compassion. And that's what I'm teaching y'all. So congratulations, you're pioneers here. And I'm so happy to be along the ride with you. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know it's a little long today, and I'm sorry for that, but I hope you enjoyed it. So I wish you well, and I'll be back again tomorrow with some more great content I hope you love, and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.